So you just flew in from DC and boy, your arm's tired, right? So
Exactly.
So you can tell us. So I know. Can you give us tell us a little bit about yourself and the Office of the National Cyber Director, what you do, and what's it all about?
Great. Well, first off, as you said, I'm Jake Braun. I'm the Acting Principal Deputy National Cyber Director. And first off, I want to thank you, Ernie, for having me. He's been doing this for almost 10 years in this organization. Between that and your military service, I just want to thank you for everything you've done for this organization and our country. So can we give a round of applause for Ernie? Thanks. So thanks for having me. That long title essentially means that I'm the number 2 in the cyber office in the White House, which is a new office. It was created by Congress in a bipartisan bill in 2019 during the Trump administration, but the first employees were actually hired after the bill went into effect in 2020, so when Biden came in. And we hired our first employee in, I think, fall of 21, and then now we've gotten to about 100 people, a little bit less than that. And so I kind of oversee that office. The first thing that we were tasked to do, and this was kind of by design from Congress, but the president agreed, was with updating and we're really writing a new national cyber strategy. And so we did that. We released it about a year ago in March, last March. And the president agreed with it, signed it, and we then put together an implementation plan to start to execute on it. It really called for 2 key shifts in how we think about cyber. One is moving the burden on cybersecurity away from the individual. So think, not worrying about my father or my 13-year-old kids, having them be the single point of failure and clicking on a link and giving up all their banking information or whatever. But moving that burden of cyber risk to the big corporations that build our tech and have far more resources to do that. And then secondly, shifting our thinking from what we've been kind of forced to do over the last 20 or 30 years, which is short-term thinking on, patching vulnerabilities and problems, really to thinking about long-term investments in cybersecurity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in some major investments that the administration has made in cyber.
So you mentioned these 2 key shifts, which, like you say, it's a sea change in how we look at things. One of the ones is rebalancing the responsibility to defend cyberspace. In practice, kind of how does that look? I mean, how do you see that coming into being?
Sure. So we've got 2 key initiatives in trying to operationalize how we would make this shift happen. So one is trying to harmonize regulations for cybersecurity across the different independent regulators in the federal government. So as many of you who work in cyber know or are regulated by these independent regulators, there is often a dozen or 2 dozen regulators your organization may have to be responsible to report to on your cybersecurity. Unfortunately, though, over the last 20 years, these independent regulators, they're very well-meaning, but they've come up with their own cyber regimes on what different organizations have to do. For example, I was just talking to the city of Chicago, CISO, a few months ago. He has 18 different independent regulators he's got to report to. And so what we're trying to do is set up an initiative where we can work with the regulators for them to be able to harmonize these different reporting regimes that they've got so that folks can focus more on doing security than doing compliance, which I think is unfortunately what happens a lot now. And now the most important thing about independent regulators is that they're independent. And so the White House or any other part of the executive branch cannot tell them what to do. So what we've initially done is an RFI that I think some folks, I know you guys did, responded to, asking industry, the private sector, NGOs, academic institutions, anybody else who wanted to respond, what they thought of the current compliance regime, what they would do to fix it, and any other kind of ideas they had on how to solve the problem. We got 109 responses. Some of these responses were representing 50 or 60 organizations, so it was really hundreds of organizations responded. And we've been analyzing those responses for the last few months since they came in, and we'll be putting out a report on this in a few weeks. And we're hoping that we'll be able to take that report and talk to key stakeholders, including the regulators, to tell them kind of what their end users are thinking about this and their ideas to fix it. Now, we're not going to be able to fix regulatory harmonization of cyber regulations in 6 months. This will be a multi-year effort, but this, we believe, is kind of the first step of getting the good sampling of those who are regulated to really put their thoughts on paper and go back to the regulators and say, look, here, this is what we're actually dealing with, and here's how we think you can fix it, and then hopefully start to make progress from there. So that's one thing. Secondly, and we just had I believe, first ever symposium of legal experts at the White House yesterday on software liability. So as any of you who've been in this industry for a while know, we've been talking about software liability for decades, but to our knowledge, nobody or very few folks have actually put what a software liability framework would look like down on paper for other folks to react to. Usually they just tell you why they think it's a bad idea or why they think it's a good idea, but actually laying it all out is difficult. So we've got 3 groups of legal experts who are experts in liability frameworks and software and so on and so forth that put together 3 different approaches. So these aren't White House approaches, but they're from really kind of pillars in the legal community. They released those at the White House yesterday, sorry, and then we'll be taking those ideas on how to do software liability framework to industry, to you all. We hope to come down here and talk to you all or have you up in Washington, and start to get feedback from industry on what a software liability regime could look like.
No, it's funny you mentioned all the reporting. I can only think of the office space. Oh, I have 5 bosses, Bob. Every time I get in trouble.
Yes.
No, that's really remarkable because we hear the same thing from around the communities, that so many reporting chains with so many different instances at different time frames. So that'll be a huge effort, a huge step in the right direction, I think. And that's which kind of leads me to thinking about the other, you mentioned the time that it's going to take to get that, but that triggers my mind thinking about long-term investments to create a resilient cyber future. So you talk a little bit about what that looks like as far as long-term investment.
Sure. So as we like to say in our office, strategies from Washington are okay, but strategies with resources are a heck of a lot better. And so there's an umbrella program that we refer to as the Invest in America program. It's made, depending on whose numbers you go by, it is about $1.8 trillion in investment across multiple sectors in the country, and it made up of 3 bipartisan bills that were passed and then signed into law by the president. So one is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL, and that goes to fund things like bricks and mortar, so airports and water systems in the grid and things like that. So for example, there's a new wing or something like that being built in the Orlando airport. That's actually BIL money. There's some new water systems being upgraded around the state of Florida, and lead pipes being replaced with non-lead pipes, which is a good thing. That's BIL money. And then CHIPS and Science Act, I think folks in this room are probably much more familiar with. It does kind of what you would expect in the name. It's initially designed to reshore a lot of chips manufacturing, but then also invest in other things like AI, nanotechnology, quantum computing, et cetera, and cyber. And then finally, the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which really is going to build out our clean energy future. So, for example, there's a massive grid investment in Florida right now, in kind of the middle part of the country with one of the major grid utilities, and that's largely being funded with IRA tax breaks and so on and so forth. And so these 3 bills make up this $1.8 trillion of investment in the Invest in America program. Now, you didn't hear me say much about cyber in any of those 3 bills, and so that's one of the reasons why me and others are around the country talking about this, because while there are a few places where cyber is called out, like state and locals get cyber grant planning dollars from CISA and FEMA and so on, cyber is an allowable expense across huge swaths of all three bills. And so what we're hoping to see is that some portion of this $1.8 trillion, and by the way, even if it's only a little bit of $1.8 trillion, that's still a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah. It's with a T, right? Yes.
Yes. Will be used for cyber, and we are pretty confident that'll wind up turning out to be the largest investment in cyber in a generation. Yeah. And one of the things that we want to make sure that's happening is that when the construction company wins the contract on the Orlando airport, that folks are saying to them, hey, you need to be putting cyber into this airport. And of course, there'll be some standards related to cyber. But what we want to see happen, and if there's one call to action for everybody in this room, it's that if those who work in cyber, and cyber companies, NGOs, academic institutions, aren't going and trying to go after working on those projects and being a part of the team that's building the airport or upgrading the water systems or whatever, then we're going to be bolting cyber on to these projects, 20 years from now, as opposed to building it all in so these projects are secure by design. And so one example I mentioned is the water case. As I assume people in this room are familiar with the Volt Typhoon attack. So this is the Chinese government attacking our water systems to pre-position, particularly around military bases, to slow or stop a rapid military mobilization in the event we wind up at war with China. We have really put an enormous amount of funding behind upgrading water systems around the country through BIL, and we want to make sure that those projects are including cyber, particularly because of this Volt Typhoon concern. And to that end, we will be putting out grant guidance in the next few weeks about how to implement cyber strategies and programs into many of these grants to include water, and are actually directly talking to different states about how we're hoping they're putting cyber, baking cyber into the front end of these water projects, so these things are again secure by design, and we're not bolting cyber onto them 20 years from now after all this investment has been spent. So that's a few examples of how we're really trying to make sure that this huge investment dollars that have been put out there are being, that the cyber community is aware of them and are pursuing these dollars and trying to get on these projects like the ones I just talked about, to try and make sure that you're there to tell the group implementing these things, well, here's how you do cyber, and here's how you do cyber on the front end and not on the back end.
Yeah, no, and that's what you said, that you make sure it's secure by design from the start. That, I think everybody in the room would tell you, that's exactly the approach that needs to happen, because we oftentimes we're going to build this under this inherently fragile system, and then, okay, go ahead and make sure it doesn't break.
Right.
All right, great. So that's not going to work. But speaking along the lines of work and making it work, recently, well, not sort of recently, but it's been out on the street for a little bit. It's the National Cyber Workforce Education Strategy, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, being in that space of trying to make more cyber people and make the cyber people we have better. I really like it seeks to transform cyber education and advocates for a skills-based approach to build more robust cyber career pathways. And it emphasizes collaboration on this. Again, this is such an important area, but can you talk a little bit how the Office of National Cyber Director is executing on the workforce strategy, and what can we see coming in the future and such?
Sure. So a couple things of why we put such importance behind this workforce issue. I know a lot of folks, not certainly you, Ernie, but others find this to be kind of like a boring, least sexy part of cyber.
What do you mean? Workforce isn't fun and exciting? Come on!
I know, it's shocking.
Shocked.
But we're putting a lot of time and energy in it for a few reasons. Number one, if there's 500,000 vacancies in cyber across the country right now, by the way, 6,000 in the Tampa area from what we understand, it's a truly a national security imperative to get these jobs filled, to decrease the vacancy rates. Secondly, just from a human perspective, these cyber jobs are good paying middle class jobs. In fact, the average cyber degree or a cyber job pays about 30% more than your average IT job. And so, getting folks into the cyber workforce is actually good for them and their families. But then more tactically, we can't implement the national cyber strategy if we don't have people to do the work. And specifically, if folks in this room, if our country is lucky enough, and hopefully you're as well, lucky enough that you wind up on one of these projects, which hopefully will be good for you and your bottom line, because they're revenue generating projects like the airport or the grid project, the grid modernization that they're doing here in Central Florida. You're going to have the same problem that everybody else does in cyber, which finding people to do the work is going to be incredibly difficult. And so if we're not helping folks figure out how to address this issue, everything I just talked about we've got to bake cyber into the front end of this $1.8 trillion of investments and everything else sounds great, and then you turn around and there's nobody to actually bake cyber in. So that's why we're so focused on it. And when we say focused on it, we think of it in two broad terms, and then I'll give you some specifics about what we're doing. So one is we need to radically expand the pipeline of those who are in cyber. And two, that means that we need to think about hiring not solely based on degree granting programs, but also based on skills. And just to be clear, this isn't either or, it's both. Because, as you know, everybody who's in a cyber degree program today, even if they all stayed in those programs, graduated from those programs, and all went into cyber, it still wouldn't be enough people to fill all the vacancies that we have. And so if we are going to radically expand this pipeline and start targeting folks at community colleges and veterans and military spouses and folks at and girls who hack and Rice's constituents and others, then we need to start thinking about, are there other ways in? And so, look, while if you want to be a super duper cyber ninja at NSA, maybe you need an advanced degree, even though many of them would say you don't. If you want to manage some firewalls or be a SOC analyst, you can likely get some training, some hands-on training, a certification, whatever, and be able to do that work. And, take the military spouses example. We can't expect these folks to have to go get 4-year degrees and so on if they want to enter this workforce. And if we really believe they're prime targets to be in the cyber workforce, then we need to be thinking about how do we help them get some hands-on training and so on, and be able to help us out. So those two big issues of radically expanding the pipeline of who works in cyber, and then to do that, really thinking about how we can do skills-based hiring are kind of our big buckets.
Yeah, I think just from our perspective, I couldn't agree more. That's the challenge that we see a lot. Again, if we had every program that's out there now running at full operating capacity, we still wouldn't hit it. So again, it's trying to identify new approaches and accessing pools of folks that have typically not seen this. And I think that's when you see it around here today. Some of the folks that are out there, they look and they, man, I can see how this is. And like you mentioned, girls Jack and Bianca, and that's like it's inspirational and the stuff that they can do to show that, listen, you can be a part of this. And it's really encouraging, like you said, that coming from the top of the government saying, listen, this isn't the hang out in your basement with a hoodie, or you don't have to be a supercomputer scientist to get into this. This is like we said, it's a big tent, and there's a lot of room for everybody. And being able to lower the barriers of entry, but also highlight there are multiple pathways to it. I think that's
right. Yeah. Well, and we know we've got to get our own house in order too. Yeah. So, for example, some of the stuff we're doing as a federal government that may apply to folks in this room is we're working to remove a 4-year degree requirement from cyber positions on federal contracts. So if any of you work with the federal government or hope to work for the federal government at some point as a contractor, right now, basically all the contracts. It's funny, that actually came because the Chamber of Commerce said to me, like, oh, you guys aren't eating your own dog food. You say hire based on skills, and every federal contract requires a 4-year degree. I'm like, there's no way that's true. Well, it turns out, of course, that's true, because we're the federal government, and we would do that. And so we're now working to remove that requirement, and we think that'll do a lot to be able to recruit from these different populations. We're also doing, for the first ever, an actual inventory of all the cyber jobs in the federal government, because if you were to ask somebody today, how many jobs are there in cyber in the federal government, nobody can answer that question. And that then hopefully will get us to a point where we know how many vacancies there are. And that number we will use to drive action. And this year we're planning on 3 different cyber hiring sprints. So this will be for federal civilian positions. If anyone wants to apply, we hope you do. Where we're over a 2 or 3 month period, and we'll do this 2 or 3 times, we'll be doing massive job fairs, which will be virtual as well, so you won't have to come to DC for it. And a lot of these jobs, they now allow you to do remotely, so you wouldn't necessarily have to move to DC to take these jobs. And we're hoping to get thousands of what they say temporary job offers out during these cyber sprints to hopefully really bring in a lot more folks to the federal workforce. So those are a few things we're doing ourselves to, like I said, get our own house in order.
No, and I don't know. This is just I'm off book here. So, but one of the is that sprint. I know one of the challenges, particularly, and I think actually some of the state government, even local government, has the same issue. Is the time from vacancy announcement to hiring? I mean, is there a way that you guys see that? Is that something that you can address or challenge, or particularly in the cyber side? Because I think we know what ends up happening is you identify a highly qualified candidate, and who wants to do it, but they can't hang around for the 90 days or whatever it is until.
Right. So one of the things that is kind of out of our remit to fix is the time it takes to get a security clearance.
Yeah.
However, that's kind of not the only thing that takes a long time. And so part of the reason we do these sprints is that we get a bunch of HR people together and get them to kind of figure out how they can get through all the kind of gates or barriers really quickly. So they will write job descriptions in a way that different agencies can share resumes quickly. So if somebody wants to apply at CyberCom, and CyberCom, they didn't get the job or whatever, CyberCom can hand the resume over to DHS or to the State Department or to whoever, which really can reduce time for someone looking for a job, because you don't have to go to 5 different agencies at different times. Secondly, they work to quickly identify who they want, like in a matter of days, and then schedule interviews within a matter of days. So that process, which can take months, they make happen quickly. And then once an agency knows they want somebody, they have it kind of set up for that time period where they can get these job offers out quickly. Now, again, you still have to wait around for your security clearance, and that's going to take us decades to fix. But at least these other things that can also take months before you even get to the security clearance point, the reason we do these sprints is to really dramatically collapse the timeline.
No, and that's being able to crack that code. That's a key thing, because that's one of the things we talk about with the folks. Is how do we get the students. Pick a student, university, whatever. It's like, hey, you get into it, and being able to know that you got to stick with it. But the fact that you can compress that timeline, that's going to give folks a lot of more reason to get into. Because I do think there was a I don't want to say a stigma. Oh yeah, we can't compete with salary for government on the government work. But I will say the one thing that you get to do on the government side is you actually the work that you do is beyond meaningful, and you get to do, being a former military person, I say, the stuff that you get to do, you look back in life and be like, wow, I can't believe I was involved in that. It's pretty remarkable stuff. So the fact that if you can make it easier for people to get into that, I just think it's a tremendous opportunity. So I'm a cheerleader for that. I don't know if anybody wants to see me do a cheer, but that's a whole other thing.
Only if there's splits involved.
I can do that once. I can do that once. And then, is there any orthopedic surgeons here? No? We're here in Florida, and we've talked about the big at the national, the high strategy, and so now I like to bring it down. Bring it down to here. Here we are in Florida. You've had the opportunity to you come down, you travel, you meet with a bunch of folks, particularly in the Tampa Bay area, and you started your visit today at the Gulf Coast Research and Education Center, which is a pretty neat place. It's just south of here. I'm pretty sure that a lot of folks, we're not even, what does that mean?
Oh,
how
yeah.
was it? So tell me.
First of all, it's so cool. If you can get a tour, you should definitely do it. And so Jack and his team who run the program had us over, and they have this amazing, huge facility where they're using AI and robotics and all this stuff to better, more efficiently grow different fruits and vegetables. And I guess these are the guys who created the white strawberry. I didn't know, which is totally crazy. And I was particularly interested because my son is obsessed with strawberries, and I have to buy like 4 of these cartons of, this 12 or 16 ounce cartons like every Sunday, and he goes through them by Tuesday. And so this really hit home for me.
That's what I was going to say, yeah, there's
you don't
a
want to
personal
see
connection.
Right, and he gets mad if anybody eats the strawberries, so I haven't had a strawberry in like a decade, except today.
You've seen them, though.
Yeah. But it's really a phenomenal program they've put together. They have dozens and dozens of PhDs who are working there, like amazing technologies and so on, of like tractors with cameras on them that like tell you when you should or shouldn't spray, and other whatever, I can't really explain it, vehicle things that will tell you if there's certain type of pest on the strawberries or whatever the fruit is. It's really fascinating. What also was great from my perspective, though, was that, and this is kind of how this comes full circle, where you really see best practice happening here in the Tampa area, is these guys had partnered with I'm going to get this right, the Florida Institute of Cybersecurity Research.
Yep.
And they're kind of talking about how the folks from the Florida Institute can come in and help them do better cybersecurity of all this stuff, because now they've got all this data, which they've got to migrate to the cloud and so on. And the Florida Institute for Cybersecurity Research has gotten some CHIPS and Science Act funding to help build out their program, which I think will hopefully give them more capacity to be able to help folks like Jack and his team in their pursuit of better tasting and more efficiently grown fruits and vegetables. And so it was really, it's one of the great things of getting out of the Beltway, because we get to see stuff like that. You don't get to see that in DC.
Like I said, nothing good happens in the office. Yes. So you get out and see that. And that, you mentioned, particularly here in Florida, that's, agriculture is such a huge part of our economy, and moving more towards greater efficiency, scalability with the technology and the artificial intelligence aspect of it, and it's good that they're partnering on the cybersecurity side, simply because, as you know, any of the quote artificial intelligence is riding on this already inherently fragile cyber ecosystem, and it doesn't take much to upset that ecosystem, and particularly if you're talking agriculture at scale. So what happens if you put the wrong pesticide down because the system was off, and then you have, I don't know, half the crop doesn't make it this year, or next year, in the following year. So that's, again, it's, like you say, it's this nexus between one of the key industries here in Florida doing good things, remarkable, but also, like I said, it's that security by design, getting ahead of it, and I think that's really remarkable. And you mentioned how that's another, leveraging those federal resources to come pull that together. So, and the fact that now I'm reasonably sure that the white strawberries will still be around for a while, and I think so. And again, personally, then you don't have to worry about a strawberry shortage, because having teenage children, I know how not having a favorite food around can get you into hot water pretty quickly.
Yes, very much so.
So, speaking of hot water, terrible segue. The private sector obviously plays a big component in cybersecurity, and we're here from the government probably doesn't work.
Right.
So how do you work with that? How do you engage with them?
That's great. Thank you for asking that. So first off, again, just to reiterate, one of the best ways that we would like to work with industry is, and the academic institutions that are here, NGOs and so on, is to encourage you all to really go identify these Invest America programs, whether it's a BILL program, a CHIPS program, or or one of the clean energy programs in your area and work to try and get on the team implementing that program to help them bake cyber in from the front end. So, I mean, obviously it'd be great for America if you did this, and it'd be good for your bottom line too. So we really hope everybody capitalizes on these resources, thing one. Thing two, I come from the private sector, and I know that, and we in my office all know that, sometimes when the government comes out and says, hey, you should do this, private sector can be kind of leery of that. And I know in particular in tech, sometimes the private sector can say, well, if the government says you should do that, then that's the opposite of what we should do.
We're going to do the exact opposite.
Yes, exactly.
It's
and
opposite.
So in our conspiring for good, we've come up with this strategy, and some folks here in the room today, which I'll mention in a second, have been willing participants, I think, in it, which is we've tried to identify folks that have really interesting programs they've put together in particularly the cyber workforce space. So let's say they have a really innovative intern recruiting program, or a great program internally where they're teaching hands-on cyber skills for free to their employees, or whatever, to turn them into cyber operators, or providing maybe free training to disaffected communities or disenfranchised communities or whatever. And so we know that folks in the cyber industry who've been in this space for so long got religion on this idea about radically expanding the pipeline and skills-based training and so on years and years ago. So what we've decided to do is highlight some of these really good efforts that are going on in the private sector, knowing that if we put it on the White House website, well then, folks will have their marketing teams go and take that information and use it to promote their company, which is great. Because then what we're hoping is that folks who are in maybe less cyber mature industries, and I always pick on the grocery industry for some reason, but that a grocery chain, that their CIO or maybe CEO or whoever is saying down to their staff, well, hey, where's our program recruiting military spouses into our workforce? Where's our program to go to this SPC or HBCU down the street? And hopefully, by highlighting great things the private sector is doing, other folks in the private sector will say, hey, we should do that too. And so if you don't mind, I want to rattle off a couple of them that we've coerced and cajoled into doing this. No, in fact, actually, we didn't. They raised their hand without any. And sorry I'm reading, but I don't want to screw up what these great programs are. So 502 Project, who's here today somewhere?
Where is he? Where's Nate? Nate Fisk. He's around somewhere, yeah.
They've committed to $500,000 to research effective, they've committed $500,000 to research effective community-grounded education in cybersecurity ecosystem, which they're going to put out a report on in January. Also, they're going to scale its community programs to at least 20 participating partners and 2,500 active members nationwide. So we're really, excited about what they're doing. Thanks. Girls Who Hack, they're committing to educate over 500 girls. Oh yeah, where's Girls Who Hack?
Is Bianca still here?
Somebody?
Quiet. Oh yeah. Anyway.
Anyway, we're committing, Girls Who Hack are committing to educate over 500 girls over the next 2 years with free online and in-person classes that teach girls hacking skills. So free training for 500 girls. Congrats to them. And Raices, did I say it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Over there he is.
Raices commits to providing free training, education, and exposure to cyber to at least 10,000 individuals over the next 2 years. And they're expanding their cyber academy to include offering an additional 750 industry certifications and scholarships to deserving students and strengthening their youth service core. So free training as well. So it's programs like this that we highlight on our website to let others see the great work that's happening out there. And so that's all to say, A, these are great groups that are doing great work. But I'll just put it down here. How about that? They're great groups doing great work. And so if any of you have programs like this that your organization is doing, whether you're a private sector company or an NGO or a university or anybody else for that matter, please let us know. We would love to highlight your project on the website as well. I have an army of attorneys that try and stop me from doing anything I want to do, so it'll take some back and forth before we get there, but we'd love to highlight other great work that's happening in the field. So that's number 2, or 3 or 4, I forget what number I'm on, but anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Also to that end, one of the things that we've tried to do to provide support for all of you is what we think is a first ever analysis of all the different cyber workforce programs that are available in the federal government today. It's as comprehensive as we could get with our first try. So I'm sure there's programs we missed, but there's about 109 different programs that we've listed. We'll happily get that to folks after this. Anybody who requests it, just let us know. And it's some of it may be totally irrelevant, like it's scholarships for individuals, or irrelevant for you. Or some of it might be super relevant if you're a training organization and there's grants for training teachers to become cyber educators and kind of everything in between. Mm-hmm. And so happy to provide that resource for folks so you guys can get the resources you need to do what you're trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. That's fantastic. And we're coming up on time, and so I'm going to ask probably the most divisive question of the day. It's opening day. Who's going to the series this year?
I mean, look, I'm from Chicago, and neither the Cubs or the White Sox are going. That's what I know.
I was going to say, be careful, because I know if there's a Cardinals fan out there, you guys might have to get into a fight in the parking lot. But
that's unfortunate.
Before we wrap up, is there, anything that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about? To leave the folks here?
Well, first off, again, thank you all for doing what you're doing here. It's great to get outside the Beltway and hear
Come
how
visit
things are
anytime,
actually.
man. You're always welcome here, anytime.
Yeah, particularly in like February.
Yes, exactly.
Summer's
a little dicey,
come
but
down.
yeah.
And so to see how things are actually working. Again, the programs we saw today at the farm where they are doing all the work around the strawberries and a whole host of other fruits and vegetables, and the cyber work that they're planning to do along with them is just really inspiring to see all that kind of come together. And so again, we really encourage everybody here to think through how you can be a part of what really winds up, we think, to be a once in a generation investment in cybersecurity. Because if this kind of passes, if all this money gets let out over the next decade, and all of you in this room haven't taken advantage of it, it'll be a missed opportunity for at the very least, America, because we need your help to make our infrastructure more secure. So I think that's it.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you come visit. So, Jake, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.